residential tech talk, lighting specialist, art residential tech,
All right, we are back on the Residential Tech Talks podcast and jumping into an area of the home integrators may not typically think about, and not the first thing that comes to mind, guys that deal with audio, video, and smart home automation, but it's getting increasingly talked about in different modes and formats and venues, and excited to be able to jump into it specifically today with Mr. Michael Rigney, the CEO and co-founder of Cala Systems. Appreciate you jumping on and chatting with us today, Michael.
Thanks, Rob. It's a pleasure.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
Well, before we dive into what you're doing and everything going on there at Cala, I wanted to give you a chance to introduce yourself and kind of give a little bit of background on who you are.
Sure. So obviously Michael Rigney, and I've worked in energy and climate for about 20, 25 years now. Really always at startups, and startups that have been working on really the electric grid and how that interacts with climate. My background before that is a mechanical engineer, but most of my career has been on the business side and really focused on, what's going to work in the marketplace. How do we sell one? How do we sell 1,000? How do we grow something that brings benefits to either the electric grid, to utilities, to commercial industrial customers, and now to homeowners?
No, that's awesome. And Cala, I know CEO and founder. First venture founding a company for you, or is this? Have you done this before?
Yeah, fourth startup,
Okay.
third time, being a co-founder, or
Awesome.
and then third time being co-founder
That's
or
awesome.
founder.
Yeah. So the energy space too, that side of things. You've got as you mentioned, a couple decades of experience within it. You've kind of seen it evolve too. So talk about just that journey yourself, what you've seen it go through.
Yeah, that's a fascinating question. Thanks for asking that. I think there are a couple things that really stand out. The technological landscape for energy has changed dramatically over the last, 25 years, and I'll cite a couple of things. Early in my career, one of the things that I was a part of was the growth of what is now the modern demand response industry. I was an early employee at a company called Enernoc, and that's oftentimes demand response is now called VPPs, virtual power plants. And essentially what's happening there is loads on the electric grid are receiving signals and they're responding. And fundamentally, that's all about balancing the supply and demand of electricity. And it's a huge, huge trend, and that's part of what we're doing, here at Cala, and it's a big part of what we're seeing going on with batteries. So that's one, massive change. Another huge change, of course, was fracking, right? So the explosion of shale gas, and then two other things that really stand out are, of course, the rise of solar and the rise of wind. Those two things have taken place over the last, really over the last 20 years, as well. But then the final two things that I would cite are the rise of batteries, which is really still in its infancy and is going to have a massive impact on the electric grid, on daily lives, and the home, and how we think about, what the products are that should be in the home. And then related to all of this, and this kind of leads into what we're doing in many ways, is the idea of electrification. That we want to go, and many people are choosing to go and electrify their homes. They're seeking to have an all electric home, and of course, many homes have been all electric for a variety of reasons. Primarily historically around whether other fuels were available, right? Are you in a place that doesn't have a natural gas line? But now we're seeing whether it's because of people wanting to do something about climate change and take steps there, or it's for cost control, or for safety reasons. People saying, "Hey, I want an all electric home."
Yeah. Well, it's funny. The different types of energy you mentioned. I'm sitting here outside of Philadelphia, where I am. So you mentioned fracking, not too far north of us. The rest of the state, big topic in this area, from a just a job standpoint too. As energy aside, jobs as well. And then my youth years, watching the wind turbines go up. Jersey's not too far away, and there's a whole bunch of wind turbines that are throughout the state there. And as you get closer to the Jersey Shore, on the ride down, and even out into the Atlantic coast there. So watching all of those things come up and about, and then obviously the solar panels that are on everyone's home these days. So all pretty interesting topics for sure, to be able to dive into. And but talking more specifically specifically about what you're doing today in Cala. Heat pump water heaters, I know are a topic that have gained traction. I think back to just my recent, time before joining residential tech today, and seeing within the home space and retailers that are paying more attention to heat pump technology, heat pump water heaters as well, specifically. So talk about, there's a lot of things I want to ask, but just the rise
Yeah, let's do
in
it.
right, but the rise in interest and awareness around that specific sector, we'll call it. Talk about that and sort of what's helped drive that.
hmm Yeah, I think one of the primary drivers of the rise of heat pump water heaters in the last 5+ years is the trend that I talked about before, which is really, the electrification of everything. The realization that the best way to address the decarbonization of the built environment is just to electrify it and then tie it back to increasingly low carbon electricity. There's a bunch of other benefits as well, and those are certainly coming to the forefront, and we should definitely talk about those. But that's really, I think, the primary driver. And it's maybe worth noting that the idea that, or the understanding is a better way to put it, that we can that we can decarbonize the built environment, through electrification. That wasn't really identified until like 2016, 2017. So it's less than a decade ago. So that's a pretty recent idea, given that, things change in energy pretty slowly. Um, the other aspect of this is, energy prices are continuing to rise.
Yep.
And, fundamentally, just in simple terms, what you're doing with a heat pump water heater is you're moving heat from the surrounding air into the water rather than just burning the electricity. And what a lot of people don't know, depending on where they live, is that just under half of the water heaters in America, and here we're talking about the residential space, Rob,
Yep.
just under half of them are electric. And those are electric resistance water heaters today.
Hmm.
And so the vast, vast majority of them. And electric resistance means you're just using a resistance element. You're taking the
Yep.
electricity and you're turning it into heat. And a readily available example of that is a toaster. That is a resistance element, right? So if you look down and it's glowing red, like that's what you're doing. You're just turning that electricity into heat. And that's what an electric resistance water heater does as well. And so a heat pump water heater, a Cala heat pump water heater is going to reduce that electricity consumption by about 3/4. So for example, in one of our pilot homes from earlier generation of prototypes, we saw a 76% reduction in the amount of electricity consumed, per gallon of hot water delivered in that home. And so just a huge cost savings that's available for about half of Americans coming from this technology. And that's
Yeah.
going to be the major driver going forward. It actually just came out. I saw an article today that the price increase of residential electricity over the last 12 months was about 5%, in the CPI. So,
Yep.
that's obviously an incredibly rapid rise in only 12 months. So you've got a technology that's been around for about, going on 15 years now, was really, really slow in its adoption, but over the last couple of years has really picked up.
Yeah, and I know we talked about it before jumping on here, but I think about a couple of years ago there was the introduction of that Inflation Reduction Act, something that
hmm
people may or may not be familiar with, but within there was a big push towards heat pump technology and heat pump water heaters. I know, in terms of providing rebates for consumers and things like that. So, do you think? I know there's many factors. Is that one that you could kind of cite as a reason why there's been so much added attention?
Yes, but I hesitate and answer that
Yeah.
slowly because the rapid increase in sales predates that actually.
Yeah.
So the sales were rapidly rising before the IRA,
Yeah.
came into existence. So our view is that heat pump water heaters, just as I said before, they just save a ton of money, and so
Yeah.
we think that growth will continue.
Well,
After the end of this year, when that rebate is no longer available.
yeah, no, that's a great point. And I know too, Cala founded 2020, is that right? So,
Yeah.
and we're sitting 2025. You guys are getting ready to launch your first products in market. So talk about that growth period, kind of what you guys have been doing to get ready. Because I know these
Yeah.
products are getting set this fall, correct?
That's correct. Yep,
Yep.
we're starting to sell this fall. Well, one thing I'll say as an entrepreneur is that one of the first things you want to do when you have an idea is you actually, in my opinion, you need to take the time and actually try to dissuade yourself and try to disprove that it's a good idea. Because when you go on that journey of starting a company, it's going to be a decade of your life. So after I came across the water heating space and came across a particular way of operating the device, and we'll talk about that, I think,
Yep.
and hope in just a second. I said, hey, I got to take some time and make sure I understand this market and actually try to disprove that this is a good idea. Obviously, I couldn't do that. And then really since then, it's been about market research. It's been about
Mhm.
team building. It's been about technology development, technology demonstration in the field, and then taking the product, through certification and setting up supply chain and getting ready, to launch this fall. So
Yeah.
it's been an exciting journey so far, and we're looking forward to getting it out there in the field.
Oh, that's awesome. And I know you explained it a little bit as you were kind of talking about the technology itself, but for the consumer but hopefully is listening, may not be that may have heard the term but not familiar with exactly what heat pump technology is. Can you? I heard I could probably pull out the clip and replay it right now, but you summed it up in kind of a word or a sentence in terms of how it works. Can you just make it simple for the consumer out there?
Yeah, happy to do that. And let's do two things actually. Let's talk about
Yeah,
how heat pump water heaters work, and then let's talk about how the Cala heat pump water heater works, because
love it.
because those two things are different. Um, so the first is the basic way that heat pump water heaters work is that they're using, again, and as it's right there in the name, the heat pump to take heat out of the air and to put it into, the tank. So that's where the heat is coming from. All other kinds of water heaters, they just take the fuel and you turn it into heat and you burn it, right? In one
Right.
way or the other, you're just burning it. So we can all reach back to some science background that we may have and say, okay, well, your efficiency can never be greater than one if you're
Right.
just going to take the energy in the form of fuel and turn it into heat. Your efficiency is always less than one. But a heat pump does not have that limit because, again, you're moving heat from somewhere else, right? So you're not
Right.
violating laws of physics. So a heat pump water heater has an efficiency between 3 and 5. That's where the savings come from. You're just using a totally different physical process for moving, heat into the water.
Hmm.
Okay, so that's why heat pump water heaters are so attractive and are so low cost compared to other kinds of electric water heaters in particular. But then let's talk about how a traditional heat pump water heater works and how
Yep.
the Cala heat pump water heater works. So a traditional heat pump water heater works by fundamentally having sensors on the side of the tank and sensing when the water is cold. So if the water is cold in the tank, it turns on the heat pump and puts heat into it. And if the water is really cold, then it's going to turn on a backup heating element, which again is a resistance element. So it has that too as a backup. So it's the same design that's been in water heaters for about 130 years, which is quite direct, quite simple,
Yep.
straightforward. Is the water in the tank cold? What the Kala heat pump water heater is doing is we're customizing water heating for every home every day. And the way that we're doing that is we're learning, Rob, how does your household use hot water? Do you use more hot water in the morning? Do you use more hot water in the middle of the day or in the evening versus, my household? When do we
Right.
use hot water? And to do that, we actually have a flow sensor. And so we're able to measure the flow, when and how much hot water is being used. So,
Yep.
so that's like, point number one. And we use that to create a prediction, for looking into the future, when will hot water be used? Then the next thing that we do is we pull in any information that you tell us is interesting and relevant to your home. These are what we call smart preferences. So if you have
Yep.
solar on your roof and you want to coordinate water heating with the solar on your roof, if you've got variable pricing in certain states, California, Arizona, but an increasing number of states as well, and your price is changing through time.
Yep.
Texas is another really good example here.
Yep.
We pull in that information and that gets fed into, again, this predictive algorithm that looks out into the future and says, hey, there's going to be high demand for hot water in 8 hours in this household, and there's high prices in 6 hours, but low prices now. So we're going to heat the water now, just to choose, one example. And so, fundamentally, that's how the Cala heat pump water heater identifies, how to go about heating. But there's
Yeah.
more to it as well. So let's talk about some of the physical components. One is we have a compressor that is variable speed, so we can change the speed at which the compressor operates. And for those who are listening at home, the compressor is the heart of any heat pump system, whether it's
Yep.
an air conditioner or a refrigerator. The compressor is what takes the refrigerant and, as the name suggests,
Yep.
compresses it to
Yep.
make it really hot at one part in the heat pump cycle. So we can control that, and that allows us to make it more efficient based
Right.
on, again, the schedule and the needs of each home. And then the last piece is we have something called a mixing valve, integrated into the unit. And the mixing valve allows us to put cold water into the stream going to the house as it leaves the unit. And that's really important because it gives us the flexibility to heat the water in the tank to a higher temperature when it makes sense, but still provide the consistent delivery temperature, to the home. Um, the result of having the variable speed compressor and the mixing valve is that we actually have physical control of when, how fast, and to what temperature we heat the water in a way that is different from a traditional
Yeah.
water heater and a traditional heat pump water heater. And so it's important to not just have the sensing, not just have
Right.
the data streams, and not just have, an advanced control algorithm. You actually have to have as well physical control of the system.
Right. Right.
And so, that's how the Cala heat pump water heater works. It's really the first water heater that learns what your home needs, what
Yeah.
your preferences and priorities are, and customizes water heating for you. And I think as a result of that intelligence and autonomous operation, it fits really well into a modern home, and
Yeah.
into a home with a whole range of smart home automation.
Yeah, you haven't said the exact term, but artificial intelligence is kind of what it is coming to mind here, right? It's constantly learning as a system, and I'm sure some of that's baked into the algorithm, the secret sauce of this system. And it makes me think too. I know there's a unique opportunity to. A follow-up question I had in mind was, as a system that learns, it obviously when you first install it isn't going to be its most efficient, right? Because it'll learn over time and then become more
Mhm.
efficient. It feels like I'm answering my own question in saying this, but with it being a system that constantly learns, it's going to always get better. But is there like I imagine as you were going through sort of like test homes and demo homes with this, and does it take a certain amount of time, or did you learn like how long it takes for it to become like, fully
Mhm.
efficient or more efficient?
Yeah, no, thanks for asking. It takes about 30 days. So for 30 days,
Yeah,
it learns your home, while it understands your patterns. And then from there, it turns on the predictive controller at about 30 days in. So that's the first
gotcha.
part of your answer. And then we live in an incredibly exciting time in terms of artificial intelligence, AI,
Yeah.
and everything that's taking place with what's known as, LLMs, right? Large
Yep.
language models. And it's worth saying that, the control strategy that we're using here is a blend of, on one hand, number one, what's called model predictive control, or what's
Yep.
known as MPC. That is a very advanced control strategy, but it's not artificial intelligence,
Right.
which I point out because it's actually good. Like applying AI to controlling hardware is still an R&D topic. We're still a
Right.
long way away from taking all this exciting development that's taking place in LLMs, your chat GPT, et cetera, very different from actually controlling a piece of hardware, right?
Yeah.
And then within how we do the controls, we are using some ML techniques, but they're sort of added on top and are accelerants
Right.
to this fundamental of model predictive control, which has been around for a couple decades actually,
Yeah.
and is a really proven way of controlling hardware.
No, that's awesome. I know I mentioned it at the top too. Today's custom integrator, this may not be a topic that is, front and center to them or that they feel comfortable or super knowledgeable about. But I want to know too, because obviously this is a space that we're on residential tech talks, residential tech today. So we're getting in front of integrators as we talk here. What's it been, or have you been working with integrators to this point? If so, how's it been going? And if not, what are you kind of doing, or what do you hope to do in terms of working more closely with this channel?
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for the question. So we have not done a tremendous amount of work with integrators so far, in part because we've been focused on
Yep.
development and launch of the product. So that is something that we look at as part of the next phase of the journey after we're in market. And this is something that I've seen in my, just in my career before. Once you've got a product in the market, you want to look at what are the integrations that make sense with other companies in the ecosystem. What are people asking you for? What are people coming and reaching out to you and proposing, that you can go and do? And, so for example, there are a couple of pieces of equipment that we've already identified that are relevant for us to integrate with, like battery systems, inverters, things like that, because they relate to the energy systems of the home. And there are really valuable things and ways we can change our behavior in response to what's going on with
Yeah.
say, the solar system, with, say, the battery. Now, with an integrator, if they have that data stream, then we could access it through sort of a common hub, right? And that would be, really interesting and just as valuable, rather than a direct integration. So we look forward to, to doing all of that.
No, that's awesome. And it's one of those things too. Like I know we talked about energy at the top and your background there. It's becoming more apparent that they get it more. I like just more recently. I think about lighting and what that's done to the custom integration space, and not relevant to this topic specifically, but more so in the fact that it's like it's an area where integrators again might have shied away from for a time, but it's become an
Yeah.
integral part of what they do today because it, in terms of getting involved in conversations and projects earlier, it's helped them. So energy's kind of been tabbed as that next phase. So I mean, I see it perfectly,
Love it.
right?
So yeah, I agree with you. I think
Yeah,
lighting might be the gateway there, but it's really important to say, water heating is the second largest use of energy in the home,
right.
after the actual heating and cooling of the space itself. So it really matters, so that's
Yeah,
that's the first thing. And the second thing is, I think that at the Cala, we can offer an integrator really interesting information that the homeowner is going to want to see, whether it's in the app, whether it's in a
yeah,
display in the home that they're interacting with. So we show to Cala homeowners how much hot water are they expecting to use,
yep,
that in the next, say, 6 hours, and how much hot water is available. What's their energy use over a given period of time? All of those statistics are really interesting to people who want to quantify their life in their home. And of course, we can surface all of that, into an integration.
yep,
We've one of the benefits of a clean sheet design, which is really what Cala is. It's starting up, anew, is the ability to have a very modern, easy to integrate with,
mhm.
information stack, and that's exactly what we've got.
No, that's awesome. And I mean, it kind of ties into I think about some of the solar brands that are out there or energy brands that
Hmm.
they're already doing business with, right? I think that's where this ties into is a lot of those conversations, between custom integrators and the energy sector via, some of the brands that are out there that are providing whether it's solar panels or just energy management. This is
Hmm.
kind of it's a branch off of that conversation and another way to just have it and talk about how hey we're already doing this and this is a relevant system that take some of that same information that we're already dealing with and just makes your home even that much more efficient and
Hmm.
cost effective.
100%.
Yeah,
And again, going back to what I said just a minute ago, this is the second largest use of energy in the home.
yeah,
So as soon as an integrator says, "Hey, we're going to step into the energy field,"
right.
they should immediately be thinking about solar system if the home has it, obviously about heating and cooling, a battery if the home has it, and they should be thinking about the water heater.
Yeah. No, I love it. So I know we mentioned too launching in the fall. So what's we're kind of getting to we're on the runway. Plane hasn't taken off
Mhm.
yet from a in market perspective. But where are you kind of sitting at right now, and what's sort of important to you, and what can we expect from Kala?
Yeah, so we're based in Boston and we're launching the product here in New England. We've got a set of installers, we've got a set of initial buyers who are excited to get the product. And so we're really focused now on dotting our I's, crossing our T's, so to speak,
Yep.
and making sure that everyone has a delightful experience, when they get their first units.
No, that's awesome. Great stuff, man. It's a really cool system, and just diving through the site, I know there's a lot to learn there for sure. And that's one of the unique things too. I mean, this space, if you're not learning, I think you kind of become stagnant as an integrator. So the
Mhm.
fact that there are some always new opportunities out there, I think is something that would behoove them to take advantage of. And this is just feels like the next one. So it's cool to be able to dive into it with you, learn about your brand, but also the space and kind of
Mhm.
where it sits. And the opportunities that are out there for integrators, because I think it's bountiful. That's for sure.
We totally agree. And I think,
Yeah.
maybe one thing I would add, I think, is it really fits with what we're talking about now is what we see as a new wave of home infrastructure that's
Mhm.
coming out. And it's really happening in every category. And the common characteristics are advanced sensors,
Yep.
advanced controls, and arising from both of those, in different hardware components in the product, and arising from all of that, an ability to not only do the core job of whatever that appliance is better, but to change what's possible and what experiences customers can get from the appliance. So there's,
Yeah.
just for example, there's us, of course, in water heaters. But if you look at the SPAN intelligent panel, right, that has all the characteristics of what I just described. So it's got
Mhm.
additional sensors. It can control the actual circuits. So it's not just a simple panel. If you look at Impulse, in terms of cooktops, if you look at Quilt, so there's just a whole
Yeah.
set of really companies. And I think it's really rich ground, as you pointed out. It's bountiful for integrators as they think about, what can a modern home really look like?
Yeah, no, it's I love that. It kind of feels like that mic drop moment, right? Kind of leave it at that. But I feel like I say leave it at that, but conversations that we'll continue to have, especially as it starts to get out there in homes. I'd love to hear sort of follow up on what you're hearing, and as the product gets out there, sort of what you're hearing from your customers. I think it's a story we'll continue to
That'd be
follow.
great.
That's for sure.
Yeah, we'd appreciate the opportunity to talk again. Thanks so much, Rob.
You bet.
If you enjoyed this episode of the Residential Tech Talks podcast, please subscribe to us on the platform you're listening on. Also, be sure to follow Residential Tech Today on social media and subscribe to our YouTube channel.
Residential tech talk, lighting specialist, residential tech.
Home automation, smart device, home or smart house.